Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really diving into some foundational concepts, the things that basically power our global economy, business, and economic systems. We've got some fantastic source material here, really good stuff that, cuts through the usual complexity and gives us some incredibly clear insights. So our mission today is essentially to give you a shortcut, a way to understand what makes the economic world tick. We'll go from, the daily grind of an economist all the way up to the big questions every country has to wrestle with. We're going to unpack scarcity, look at different economic models, and figure out how we measure if an economy is actually healthy.
Exactly. And I think it's crucial we don't just define these things. We need to show why they actually matter to you. I mean, whether you're making personal financial decisions or just trying to follow the news or understand the forces shaping your own world, the goal here is really connecting those dots so you walk away feeling truly well-informed. Maybe with a few of those aha moments.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Maybe start small. Look at the daily reality for someone who's, right in the thick of it. We talk about these abstract economic ideas, but what does it actually look like on the ground, in someone's day job? Our source introduces us to Sarah, an associate analyst. And get this, she's heading to the office at 4 a.m. every morning.
4 a.m. Wow.
Yeah. Her job is to help prep a morning briefing. Specifically, tracking changes in the Saudi economy and the GCC alliance, that's the Gulf Cooperation Council, right? A key player.
A very key economic bloc in that region, yes.
And her routine sounds intense. She's checking online for the latest on major stock markets, looking through international news for anything affecting Saudi Arabia or GCC members, updating forecast charts, typing up notes, all before her team meeting.
That's a huge amount to cover before most people have had their first coffee.
Right. And here's the kicker. Even after finishing up at the office, say around 2 p.m., she still checks economic info during her downtime. That intensity is really striking. It makes me wonder, how does that constant real-time pressure shape the kind of advice economists give? Or even the type of person who thrives doing that?
That's a fantastic point. It really highlights the dynamism of it all. Economists like Sarah are absolutely vital. They're gathering and analyzing all this information to try and anticipate economic changes. And their predictions, well, they're used by everyone. Big corporations, government officials, even individual consumers making major decisions, like buying a house. For economists working within companies, it means things like forecasting market size, understanding shifts in consumer demand, predicting sales and costs, analyzing competitors. They're constantly advising on strategy, always keeping an eye on international markets, too. It's a big picture role.
So it's not just about the numbers themselves, but trying to anticipate the ripple effects, the consequences of those numbers. And given that, that real-time high-stakes environment, our source asks a really interesting question. Why might creative decision-making be an important skill for a business economist? It's clearly not just crunching data.
Precisely. It's definitely not just running models or plugging in numbers. Think about those market shifts. Sarah tracks maybe a sudden geopolitical event or a disruptive new technology pops up. Just looking at the data won't tell you how consumers will react or how a totally new business model might emerge from the chaos. That's where you need that creativity, that ability to think outside the box, connect different bits of information in a novel way to offer, well, truly insightful advice. And speaking of different insights, it's worth mentioning how broad this field actually is. Beyond the corporate world, you find economists working as, say, urban and regional planners, or budget analysts, economics teachers, investment analysts, even field researchers out collecting primary data.
Wow, okay.
It really shows the breadth of their impact,
That constant need for foresight, for connecting dots.
Yeah.
It really brings us back to the core challenge driving all this, doesn't it? Scarcity. We all deal with scarcity every day, right? We have unlimited wants, but only limited resources. I mean, think about it. Businesses provide for our fundamental needs: food, water, clothes, shelter, plus education, healthcare, transport, careers. And then there are our wants, the things that add comfort or pleasure, the latest tech, maybe a fancy car, that sort of thing. But there's always that fundamental catch.
There absolutely is. The basic economic problem is exactly that. Our needs and wants are, for all practical purposes, unlimited. But the resources we have to satisfy them, definitely limited. And this imbalance, this gap, is what we call scarcity. It's the simple fact that we don't have enough resources to satisfy every single need and want out there. And it applies even to things we might think are abundant. Our sources mention sand, for example. Feels infinite, right?
Yeah, you don't usually think of running out of sand.
Exactly. But it's actually facing scarcity because of how much we use it, especially in construction. This could really challenge developing regions, like in East Africa, where infrastructure depends heavily on it. It's a powerful reminder. Now, the things we use to produce goods and services, those are called economic resources, or sometimes factors of production. They generally fall into three buckets. First, you've got natural resources. These are the raw materials from nature oil, minerals, good soil. Think Saudi Arabia, huge oil reserves, obviously, but also gold, iron ore, copper.
Okay.
Second, human resources. That's the people, power farmers, factory workers, managers, salespeople, and critically, entrepreneurs, people taking the risks, starting the businesses.
Right, the people doing the work and having the ideas.
Precisely. And third, capital resources. These are the tools, the equipment, the buildings, the money needed for production. Think factories, delivery trucks, computers, software.
Got it. Natural, human, capital.
Those are the building blocks.
So, because of this fundamental scarcity problem, every single country, it doesn't matter how big or rich, has to answer three basic economic questions. One, what goods and services are we actually going to produce? Two, how are we going to produce them? And three, whose needs and wants will get satisfied with the stuff we produce?
And how a country answers those three questions, that defines its economic system. The biggest difference between the systems really boils down to how much the government gets involved in making those decisions.
Okay, let's make this more concrete. Our source gives us an example, Ali, who experienced two really different systems. He remembers growing up overseas in a farming community. They used traditional methods, pretty much how things had always been done, and the government told them what they could grow.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Then fast forward, Ali now works for a big multinational company in the city. And there, the company itself decides what to produce, how much, what price to charge. It sounds like two totally different worlds.
It really does, and Ali's story is a perfect illustration. His upbringing sounds like a traditional economy. Goods and services are produced the same way they were in the past, often in, less developed rural areas, focused on basic needs. Very little change.
Right, doing what's always been done.
Exactly. And the government telling farmers what to grow. That points directly towards a command economy. Here, the government owns or controls most resources and makes the big decisions: what gets produced, how it's distributed, who gets it. Personal economic choices are usually pretty limited.
So the government's in charge.
Largely, yes. Then, Ali's current job, where the multinational company makes its own decisions on production and pricing, that's a classic market economy. In this system, resources are mostly owned and controlled by individuals and businesses. They answer those three economic questions through buying and selling in the marketplace, supply and demand, competition.
Okay.
Individuals and businesses have a lot of freedom, and government involvement is typically quite limited.
All right, so traditional command market. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because in reality, most countries today, especially developed ones, aren't purely one thing, are they? They're usually a blend. A mixed economy, which kind of combines elements of command and market systems. There's still government involvement, but also a lot of private enterprise. Makes sense, right? A pure system might have some big drawbacks.
Absolutely. You'd be hard-pressed to find a truly pure market or command economy anywhere in the world today. Most are mixed, and our source highlights Saudi Arabia as a really good example of a mixed economy. Its structure and guiding principles are rooted in Islamic law, Sharia compliance. While the private sector is definitely growing, the government still plays a very significant role. You see this through huge investment initiatives, often led by the Public Investment Fund or other major state-linked companies.
So the government is actively steering things.
Very actively. The stated goals are clear. Support local economic diversification, moving away from just oil, improve the climate for foreign investors, boost the private sector's contribution, really encourage small and medium businesses, and also enable the nonprofit or third sector. The aim is a diversified, sustainable economy. So it's definitely a planned approach, but operating within a broader market framework.
Okay, that makes sense. So if these are the systems countries use, how do we actually know if they're working well? How do we measure economic growth or performance beyond just, how things feel day to day?
Yeah, that's where economic indicators come in. The big one, the one you hear about most often, is gross domestic product, GDP. Think of GDP as like the grand total market value of all the final goods and services produced inside a country's borders over a specific period, usually 1 year.
Final goods. Why final?
Good question. It's to avoid double counting. So if a company makes steel and then a car company buys that steel to make a car, we only count the value of the final car in GDP, not the steel and the car. Otherwise, you'd be counting the steel twice.
Ah, okay. Makes sense. And it doesn't count stuff I do myself, like if I repaint my living room.
Nope, doesn't count that either. GDP generally covers 4 main areas: All consumer spending, that's us buying food, clothes, housing, everything. Then business spending, sometimes called investment things, like new buildings, equipment, adding to inventory. Then government spending on its employees, goods, services. And finally, the net trade balance, which is the value of a country's exports minus the value of its imports.
Okay, so it's a pretty broad measure.
It is. And generally, if GDP is increasing year over year, it's seen as a sign of a growing, healthy economy.
That gives us the big picture.
Yeah.
But just the total GDP number,
Yeah.
it doesn't really tell you how the average person is doing, does it? A huge country could have a big GDP, but still have lots of poverty.
Exactly. It doesn't tell the whole story about individual well-being. That's why GDP per capita is also a really important indicator. It's pretty simple. You just take the total GDP and divide it by the country's total population.
So output per person.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, GDP per capita gives us a better sense of the standard of living, not just the raw economic output. If GDP per capita is increasing, it often suggests the economy is becoming more productive for each person. If it's decreasing, well, it might mean less productivity, especially if the population is growing, but the overall output isn't keeping pace.
Okay, so GDP and GDP per capita are key. What else do we look at for a more complete picture? Things like labor activities and the unemployment rate must be important. Workers create the goods and services, and their wages fuel spending, right?
Absolutely fundamental. The labor force drives production and demand. The unemployment rate, that's the percentage of people in the labor force who are actively looking for work but don't have a job, is a critical indicator. High unemployment often signals economic trouble, maybe reduced demand for goods and services. Our source notes, for context, that back in 2021, Saudi Arabia's labor force was over 16 million people.
That's a lot of workers. And their effectiveness, their productivity must be crucial too. How much output do you get per worker, essentially?
Productivity is absolutely key for long-term sustainable growth. You can boost it in a few ways. Better capital resources, new equipment, better technology, also through worker training, making people more skilled, and better management techniques, organizing work more efficiently.
Like specialization, having people focus on specific tasks.
Exactly. Strategies like specialization of labor, where workers get really good at one particular thing, or division of labor, breaking down a complex process into smaller assigned steps. These are designed to boost output per worker. And this ties directly into things like Saudi Vision 2030. A big part of that plan is aiming to increase productivity by strengthening the education system, improving business skills, and also attracting highly skilled workers from around the world.
Makes sense. Then there's consumer spending. We need to look at how much people are actually buying.
Definitely. We track personal income. That's all the money people get from salaries, wages, investments, government payments, etc. And then retail sales, which measures the actual sales of goods and services to consumers, cars, clothes, food, building materials, everything. If retail sales are going up, it usually means the economy is growing and people feel confident enough to spend.
Okay. And the last piece seems to be investment activities. Money businesses spend on big long-term things.
Right. This is the money businesses spend on items they'll use over a long period. Think land, new factories, major equipment upgrades, developing entirely new products, capital investment.
And where does the money for that big spending come from?
Several key sources. Personal savings are actually crucial. When people save money in banks or other financial institutions, that money becomes available for businesses to borrow and invest. A country's savings rate is really important for growth.
I hadn't thought of it quite like that. Savings fueling investment.
It's a direct link. Then, of course, businesses can raise money through stock. Issuing stock means selling ownership shares in the company. The stock's value fluctuates based on earnings, market sentiment, all sorts of things. And finally, there are bonds, and in contexts like Saudi Arabia, sukuk. These are essentially ways for companies or governments to borrow money. With a bond, you're lending money. With sukuk, which are Sharia compliant, it's structured more like investors getting partial ownership in an asset until maturity.
Okay, so stocks, bonds, sukuk, different ways to channel money into those big investments.
Exactly. And these diverse investment options are really critical for economies like Saudi Arabia's, helping them diversify, expand their global business footprint, and ultimately create more jobs.
Okay, so we've journeyed through scarcity, different economic systems, how they function, how we measure their health with all these indicators, GDP, productivity, spending. But how do we actually make sense of all this data? How do we know if the numbers are reliable or what they really mean? That seems to lead us to needing good research skills, right?
You've hit on a crucial point. Making sound decisions, whether you're running a business or just managing your own finances, fundamentally relies on having good information. And getting good information requires research skills.
This is not just for academics.
Not at all. Research, at its core, is just a systematic, objective way to study something to establish facts and principles. It usually starts with a question or a problem you want to solve. And this brings up an important question for you, the listener. How can you apply these kinds of systematic research skills to make better decisions in your own life? Especially when you're bombarded with economic news or maybe conflicting advice.
Yeah. How do you cut through the noise?
Well, the process generally involves a few key steps. First, you formulate a clear question. What do you really need to know? Second, you gather and review information. Has anyone else already studied this? What's already known? Third, and this is critical, you separate fact from opinion. Rely on objective data, check your sources, look for credibility. Fourth, maybe you propose a hypothesis like a prediction or an educated guess. Fifth, you might collect data to test that hypothesis, maybe through surveys, observations, or even little experiments in your own context. Sixth, you analyze that data, maybe using basic statistical ideas. Seventh, report the results, even if it's just to yourself. And eighth, put those results into practice, make your decision based on the evidence you gathered.
That's a really practical framework, and it underscores that this isn't just some abstract academic exercise. It's about navigating the world more effectively. In this age of, endless information and misinformation, why is it so incredibly important to be able to distinguish fact from opinion when trying to understand something as complex and impactful as an economic system, or even just your own personal financial situation?
Well, if we connect this back to the bigger picture, understanding these economic fundamentals, using these research skills, it isn't just about being able to recite definitions from a textbook. It's about recognizing the sort of invisible forces that are constantly shaping our daily lives and the whole global landscape. It's about being an informed participant in the economy, not just, a passive observer being pushed around by forces you don't understand.
That's a powerful way to put it, being an informed participant. Which leads us nicely to our final thought for you today. After diving into all this, think about scarcity, different systems, all these ways we measure economic health. What specific economic indicator, or maybe which aspect of an economic system, do you think has the most direct, perhaps even surprising impact on your daily life? And how might understanding that one thing a bit better empower you to make different choices? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, ask questions, and stay curious.